it starts like any other day. You wake up to the sound of your alarm blaring in your ear. The same irritating tone that gets you out of bed every morning. The room's cold. The sun's barely peeking through the blinds. You reach over to silence the damn thing, rub your eyes, and try to make sense of the world for a second. Just another morning. I work at a convenience store. It's nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills. I stock the shelves, ring up coffee for the regulars, and swipe my card at the end of the day to get a few extra hours in. Simple stuff. The kind of routine that makes you forget the days are even passing. You don't ask questions. You just do your job and get by. But then, the dream started. It was a Friday night when I first heard about it. The kind of evening where the store's slow, the streets are empty, and the hum of the lights is the loudest thing in the room. I was putting away a fresh shipment of snacks when Tim, one of my old high school friends, walked in. He wasn't looking great. Pale, bags under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. I greeted him, like always, and he gave me this weird half smile before leaning on the counter. "You all right?" I asked, trying to read him. Tim shook his head, glanced over his shoulder, like he was making sure no one was listening. "You're not gonna believe me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I had the strangest dream last night, and I think you might have had it too." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He leaned in a little closer, his voice dropping even lower. "It's like there was this figure, tall, thin, and faceless. It was in my house, standing there, whispering my name. I swear to God, it felt so real. I woke up, and I could still hear the whispers, like it was in my head. I laughed it off at first. Sounds like a nightmare, man. You're just stressed. It happens." But Tim wasn't laughing. His eyes were wide, like he was still trying to shake it off. And that's when I realized he wasn't the only one. "You heard about Mike, right?" he asked. "He's been talking about the same thing, the same whispers." Tim hesitated, glancing around again. "You might think I'm crazy, but a bunch of people in town have been saying they're having the same dream. All different nights, about the same damn figure." I frowned, leaning back against the counter. It didn't sit right with me. We all know how rumors spread in small towns, but this was different. Mike Tim. Even a few of the other guys I knew from around here. They all started mentioning it. The figure, the whispers. And as weird as it sounded, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd heard it before. That night, after punching out, I went home and tried to bury the conversation. Dreams like that were just the brain misfiring, right? A glitch in the system. I cracked a beer, went through the motions. Scrolling, channel surfing, anything to keep the gears turning, to drown out the creeping unease. But when I finally turned in, the bed felt wrong, cold. I don't know what pulled me awake. The silence was thick, pressing down like a shroud. Or maybe it was a prickling on the back of my neck, the instinctive knowledge of being watched. But my eyes snapped open, and there it was, the figure. Its face was obscured, or perhaps non-existent. I couldn't tell, but I felt its presence, a weight in the room. It stood at the foot of my bed, an unseen gaze fixed upon me, patient, expectant. Then it whispered my name. The sound was faint, just as Tim had described. Too faint, as if the voice originated not from the room, but from within the confines of my own skull. I squeezed my eyes shut, a futile attempt to banish the apparition. But the whispers persisted, growing in volume, weaving themselves into the fabric of my consciousness. This was no longer a dream. Sleep eluded me for the remainder of the night. I lay rigid, eyes wide, paralyzed by a primal fear. The frantic rhythm of my heart a deafening counterpoint to the whispers. When dawn finally broke, and I stumbled to the bathroom, I desperately hoped I had imagined it all. A trick of the light, a phantom of the night. But then I saw my reflection in the mirror. For a fleeting, terrifying moment, I was a stranger to myself. I wasn't sure who I was looking at. I don't know what you'd call it. It's not a nightmare anymore. Not just a dream, it's something else. Something that starts following you. Like a shadow that doesn't belong, creeping into the corners of your life. The day after I had that first dream, things didn't feel right. It wasn't just the figure anymore. It was the feeling, the constant, nagging sense that I wasn't alone, that something or someone was always watching just outside my field of vision. Work was the usual, slow, uneventful. But even then I could feel it, like the air in the store had thickened. Like every movement, every sound was just a little too loud, a little too noticeable. Tim came in again that afternoon. He wasn't the same. He looked even worse, like he hadn't slept at all. His eyes red and wild. I'd been busy, but when I saw him standing there, fidgeting with his hands, I couldn't ignore it. "Man, what's going on with you?" I asked. He looked at me like he didn't even hear me at first. Then his eyes focused, and he stepped closer to the counter, lowering his voice. "It happened again," he said, glancing over his shoulder. Like he was expecting someone to be listening. I froze. "What do you mean?" "The figure, it was in my room. I woke up and it was standing right there. I swear, it was closer this time. I could almost feel it like it was breathing." He shuddered, rubbing his arms as if to shake off the cold. "I've been hearing its voice, even when I'm awake. Like a low hum, right at the back of my head. I don't think I can get away from it." I could tell he wasn't making it up. The way his hands trembled, the panic in his eyes, it wasn't normal. But the worst part, I could feel it too. Not just the dreams anymore. It wasn't even just Tim's story. There was something wrong in the air. Something thick and suffocating. I thought about what happened the night before, about the figure in my room, the whispers. I hadn't told Tim about it. I wasn't sure what to say. I wasn't sure I even understood what was happening. After work, I went straight home. I tried to distract myself, the way I always did. Turned on the TV, flipped through channels, but nothing seemed to work. Everything felt wrong. It was too quiet, too still. And that's when I saw it, the muddy footprints. They were right there, just outside my front door. At first, I thought maybe I'd stepped in something earlier that day. But no, these tracks were different. They didn't look like shoes, not even like boots. They were larger, like a person's sure, but stretched. Distorted somehow, like something heavy was dragging itself across the ground. And there was no way they could have been there when I came home. I would have noticed. But there they were, leading right up to my door. I didn't know what to do. I stared at them for a long time, trying to piece together some kind of explanation. But all I could hear was the faint whispering from inside my head. A voice that wasn't mine, something that felt too close. I stepped back, closing the door. But even as I locked it, I felt that same pressure in the air. Something was out there, watching, waiting. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The whispering was louder now, ringing in my ears like static. I thought it was in my head at first, but then I heard something else. A knock at MY door. I didn't move. I didn't want to move. I just stared at the door. Heart pounding in my chest, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the knocking didn't stop. It was soft at first, barely audible, grew, until it was constant, relentless. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to look. I slowly, quietly approached the door. My hand shook as I reached for the handle, and for a moment, I stood there, just breathing. The world felt wrong. The silence outside was thick, oppressive. And then I opened the door. Nothing. Just the dark, empty street. No one was there, but the footprints were gone. Like they had never been there. As if they'd been erased, wiped away by some unseen force. I stepped back inside, locked the door, and didn't dare look outside again. The whispering never stopped. It was louder now, inside my head. Closer. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the walls, waiting for the next sound, the next sign that it was coming for me. But deep down I knew it was already here.